At first, it looked like a missing child case. A 10-year-old girl had spent the night with her younger brother and a man the family trusted. By morning, she was gone. Police were called. Officers responded. Questions began. And for a brief moment, it seemed possible that Briazia Terrell had simply wandered off or ended up somewhere nearby. That hope did not last long, because from the moment detectives began speaking with 47-year-old Henry Dinkins, something felt wrong. His answers were vague. His behavior was strange. And instead of acting like a man desperate to find a missing child, he acted like someone struggling to stay ahead of the truth. This is the story of how a routine missing child report in Davenport, Iowa, turned into one of the darkest investigations the city had ever seen, and how the man who claimed to care for Briazia like his own daughter became the center of a nightmare no family could have imagined. On July 10th, 2020, Briazia Terrell was reported missing. The night before, she and her 8-year-old brother, DL, had stayed over at the apartment of Henry Dinkins. Henry was DL's biological father, and according to him, had also helped raise Briazia for years. Even though he was no longer with Briazia's mother, Aisha Langford, he remained close enough to still be part of the children's lives. That made what happened next even harder to comprehend. By the following morning, Briazia was gone. Her mother, Aisha, called police around 9:30 a.m., frantic and searching for answers. At that point, officers were dealing with what sounded like a missing child case. Those calls are serious from the start, but in the early stage, police still have to consider a range of possibilities. Maybe the child wandered off. Maybe she was at a nearby friend's home. Maybe there had been a misunderstanding. Maybe she would be found quickly. But Henry's behavior started raising concern almost immediately. When police questioned him, his responses didn't sound like those of a worried adult trying to help. They sounded scattered, evasive, and oddly detached. He could not clearly explain the last time he saw Briazia. He stumbled over details that should have been simple. He could not remember what she had been wearing. He could not confidently describe important information about her disappearance. And even more strangely, he claimed not to know his own address or even his own phone number. That stood out right away. It is one thing to be stressed. It is another thing entirely to be unable to answer the most basic questions about yourself while a child is missing. Detectives noticed it, and the more they talked to him, the more uneasy they became. Henry said Briazia had been in the house the night before. He said she was in bed. He said the children had been sleeping. But when officers pressed for a timeline, his story became murky. He couldn't firmly say when he noticed she was gone. He couldn't place the movements of the night in any reliable order. He seemed to be feeling his way through the conversation instead of telling the truth. Meanwhile, Aisha's reaction was completely different. She was frantic, emotional, and desperate. She wasn't focused on explaining herself. She was focused on finding her daughter. And almost immediately, tension surfaced between her and Henry. In one of the most telling early moments, Aisha confronted him directly. She made it clear that Briazia had disappeared on his watch. She was angry. She was terrified. And unlike Henry, she was not acting like this was just confusion or bad luck. She was already sensing that something was deeply wrong. That instinct would prove devastatingly accurate. As officers continued gathering information, they also spoke with Henry's girlfriend, Andrea, whose apartment was where the children had stayed that night. She told police Briazia had been there late into the night and that the children were sleeping in her bed while she and Henry slept elsewhere in the apartment. But Andrea also raised suspicion. When officers asked to come inside and take a quick look, she hesitated. It was not an outright refusal, but it was enough to stand out. In missing child cases, time matters. Officers often do a quick recheck of the home, even when everyone says they already searched. People overlook things. Children hide. But Andrea's reluctance, however brief, added to the growing sense that this household was not being fully open. And as police moved through the apartment, they found no sign of Briasia. That alone would have been alarming. But what made it worse was how little either adult seemed to have done before police arrived. Henry had not been knocking on neighbors' doors. He had not organized people to search. He had not gone building to building asking if anyone had seen her. Hours had passed, and yet his behavior did not reflect urgency. That mismatch kept bothering detectives. Because when a child disappears, adults who love that child tend to react in instinctive ways. They panic. They search. They ask questions. They run outside. They call everyone they know. They don't sit back and wait to be directed. Henry didn't look like a man in crisis. He looked like a man trying to manage a situation. At the station, detectives began digging into Henry's relationship with Briasia. He insisted he had raised her. He called her his baby. He described both children as if they were his. He made a point of presenting himself as a father figure, not an outsider. On the surface, that might have sounded comforting. But in the context of the case, it also gave him exactly the position investigators feared most: trusted access. Once detectives turned fully to the events of the night, Henry's story started to collapse under its own weight. He claimed that after the children went to bed, he had left the apartment more than once. First, he said he went to see a friend named Vince. Then he said he left again to go to a quick shop and buy cigarettes. But when detectives asked for times, he had none. When they asked him to place these trips in order, he drifted. He could not lock down when he returned, when he left again, or when he supposedly realized Briasia was missing. That kind of vagueness matters. When people tell the truth about ordinary events, they may forget exact times, but the shape of the night still makes sense. Henry's account did not. It kept changing. It floated. It sounded like someone trying to stay flexible enough to adjust if detectives found contradictions. He then claimed that he had spent part of the morning driving around with his son DL, looking for Briasia before calling Aisha. According to him, he told Aisha that Briasia was missing, and she initially thought he was joking. He said he gave the phone to DL, who told his mother they really did not know where Briasia was. Henry framed himself as confused, overwhelmed, and unsure what to do. But investigators quickly discovered something that cut directly against that version. Henry claimed he was on his way to the police station to report Briasia missing. But Aisha, who was driving herself, reported seeing him speeding in the opposite direction. That detail mattered because it showed he was not where he claimed to be, not doing what he claimed to be doing. The timeline was not just weak, it was false. As the day turned into evening, the search for Briasia intensified. Police canvassed neighborhoods, followed leads, spoke with family, and expanded the effort. Aisha was distraught. Every hour that passed without news made the situation feel worse. For her, this was not confusion. This was terror. Her daughter was gone, and nothing about the story she was being told made sense. Inside the interrogation room, detectives started focusing on something else. Henry's car. He had left the apartment in his Chevrolet Impala. But when he arrived at the station, that car was nowhere in sight. At first, he tried to dodge the issue. He argued over wording. He pushed back on the suggestion that he had been driving it. He said the car was around. He resisted telling detectives exactly where it was. That made no sense. If you are trying to help find a missing child, you do not play games about your vehicle. Not when that vehicle may contain evidence, not when it may help confirm your route, not when police are already suspicious. Yet Henry clearly did not want them near it. Then detectives found the Impala parked just 1 block from the station. He had walked the rest of the way. That single choice was enormously revealing. It suggested he did not want the car seen in connection with him at the station. It suggested concealment. It suggested he knew there was something about that vehicle police would care about. By now, suspicion was no longer building quietly. It was hardening. The detectives then turned to Henry's phone. They asked to look at his call logs and messages to verify who he had contacted and when. At first, Henry tried to sound cooperative. He said he had nothing to hide. He said they could look through the phone. But when it came time to actually open it, his behavior changed completely. He became defensive. He did not want to reveal his passcode. He did not want detectives watching him while he entered it. He hesitated, stalled, and fidgeted. He kept insisting they could look, but only on terms that would let him control the device. Detectives knew that pattern well. It often means the person is worried not about privacy in general, but about specific evidence disappearing. He even seemed to forget the code for a moment, becoming increasingly agitated. It was the behavior of someone trying to buy time, not someone eager to help find a child. At one point, detectives placed a map in front of him and asked him to mark the places he had driven while supposedly searching for Briasia. It was a simple test. If he had spent hours driving around looking for her, he should have had no problem showing where he went. But the marker sat there untouched. He couldn't do it. That silence said as much as any answer. Eventually, detectives did gain access to his phone, and what they found was deeply disturbing. In his history were searches for explicit videos involving minors. That discovery confirmed one of the darkest fears investigators had already started developing. This case was not just about a missing child. It was about a child who had been in danger inside a trusted adult's care. From there, the investigation moved quickly. Police obtained a search warrant for Henry's RV. Inside, they found items that added even more weight to the case, including bleach and a machete. Those discoveries did not stand alone. They sat beside his inconsistent story, the hidden car, the suspicious phone behavior, and his criminal background as a registered sex offender. That was enough for police to arrest him. And even after his arrest, the horror of the case kept growing. While in jail, Henry reportedly made a chilling remark to his cellmate. According to that account, when news coverage discussed the ongoing search for Briasia, Henry said they would never find her. That statement landed with terrible force once the truth came out. For months, Briasia remained missing. Then, later that year, a decomposed body was found in a wooded area near DeWitt, Iowa, about 20 miles from where she had vanished. DNA testing confirmed the worst. It was Briasia. The missing child case had become a murder case. And with the body found, detectives were finally able to piece together what they believed had happened that night. According to the evidence presented, Henry left with Briasia and took her to his RV, where investigators believed he likely assaulted her. He then returned briefly to the apartment before leaving again. Andrea later told investigators that she woke up around 3:30 a.m. and noticed both Henry and Briasia were gone. She also said that when Henry returned briefly, he went into the closet and grabbed something before leaving again. Investigators came to believe that something was a gun. Andrea added another disturbing detail. She looked out the window and saw Briasia outside near the car in the early morning hours. That meant Briasia was still alive at that point. Yet Andrea had not shared this information when officers first arrived. She had seen enough to know something was unusual, but she did not speak up immediately. That silence has remained one of the more unsettling aspects of the case. After leaving the apartment again, Henry and Briasia were seen at a nearby gas station. From there, investigators believe he drove to a wooded, secluded area on the outskirts of DeWitt. It was the kind of location chosen for one reason: privacy, distance, silence. Deep enough into the area, according to the evidence, he led Briasia down a steep embankment near a hidden pond. Once they were far enough from anyone who might hear, he shot her twice. Medical evidence later supported that Briasia had been killed by gunfire, including a bullet path consistent with a shot traveling through the lower part of her jaw. It is the kind of detail that turns an already unbearable case into something even more painful, because it forces the reality of how personal and deliberate the killing was. After shooting her, Henry's car apparently became stuck in mud. That detail explained something detectives had noticed much earlier, but could not yet fully place: the change in his shoes. When Henry first interacted with police, he was later seen in the same clothes, but with different footwear. Investigators came to believe he changed shoes because the original pair were muddy from the area where he left Briasia's body. That small detail, one pair of shoes swapped for another, became another piece of a much larger and far darker puzzle. Then came one of the most important witnesses in the case: DL. Henry had claimed that he took his son with him to search for Briasia. But when detectives later spoke with DL, what emerged was far more damning. DL said he had been sitting in the car alone while his father got cleaning supplies. He described seeing bleach. He described a large knife in the trunk. That testimony was devastating. It showed Henry was not out conducting a frantic search. He was buying materials to clean up and conceal evidence. Even more chilling, he had his own son with him during part of this process, exposing that child to the aftermath of a crime he was too young to fully understand. By the time all of this was laid out, the case against Henry Dinkins was overwhelming. He was charged and ultimately found guilty of first-degree murder and first-degree kidnapping. The sentence was 2 mandatory life terms without the possibility of parole. Even after the verdict, Henry did not offer real accountability. In his final statement, he tried to portray himself as a victim of racial profiling, claiming the investigation had unfairly targeted him from the beginning. But that argument could not stand against the mountain of evidence. The lies, the hidden car, the disturbing searches, the cleaning supplies, the witness statements, the cellmate testimony, the body, the forensic findings, and the timeline that pointed relentlessly back to him. None of that was profiling. It was proof. And then came the moment that often says more than any verdict can. Briasia's mother, Aisha, addressed the court. Her words carried the weight of every unanswered question that remains when someone loses a child to violence. She spoke not only about loss, but about torment, the endless torment of wondering what Briasia experienced in her final moments. Was she scared? Did she see it coming? Did she try to run? Did she beg him to stop? Did he watch her die? Those are the questions that haunt families forever. Because in cases like this, a conviction may bring legal closure, but it does not bring emotional closure. It does not erase the final hours. It does not return the child. It does not silence the images the family can never stop imagining. That is what makes this case so devastating. Briasia was only 10 years old. She should have been safe. She should have been asleep. She should have woken up and gone home. Instead, she disappeared during a routine overnight stay with people the family knew. And by the time the truth came out, she had already been stolen from everyone who loved her. That betrayal sits at the center of this story. Not just violence, but trusted violence. Not just murder, but murder committed by someone who had access precisely because he was trusted. And that is often what makes child cases the hardest to hear. The threat does not always come from some unknown stranger in the dark. Sometimes it comes from the person already inside the circle. The person who knows the routines. The person everyone believed would protect the child instead of harming them. For Whispers of Crime, this case is a grim reminder of how quickly appearances can collapse. A missing child report can begin with ordinary questions and, within hours, reveal a predator hiding behind familiarity. A man can call a child his own and still become the one who destroys her life. And a family can spend years carrying the weight of questions that will never be answered in a way that could ever heal them. Briasia Terrell should be remembered for more than the horror of what happened to her. She was not just the victim in a case. She was a daughter, a sister, a little girl whose life mattered long before it became part of a courtroom record. But the truth of her case matters too, because it shows how suspicion often starts with something small, a vague answer, a missing detail, a story that doesn't sit right. Detectives noticed those cracks early. And because they kept pushing, because they did not accept Henry's confusion at face value, the truth eventually came into focus. It was a terrible truth, but it was the truth. And in the end, that truth put Henry Dinkins exactly where he belongs, behind bars for the rest of his life, with no chance of ever walking free again. For Aisha and the people who loved Briasia, that still is not enough. Because justice can punish the killer, but it cannot give them Briasia back. And that is the part that will never stop hurting.